Dr. Elena Martinez wiped sweat from her face as she stared at the massive stone wall before her. She had been digging on this planet for 3 months, and nothing could have prepared her for what lay beneath the red soil of Kepler 442b, the wall, stretched up into the darkness above their lights and seemed to go on forever in both directions. It was made of some kind of black stone that felt warm to the touch and hummed with energy that made her tools go crazy. Ryan Brooks knelt beside a section of the wall where strange symbols covered the surface. He was the best language expert on their team, and he had never seen anything like these markings. They seemed to shift and move when he looked at them directly, but stayed still when he looked from the corner of his eye. Kate Morrison was running her scanner over the wall again, but it kept giving her readings that made no sense. The machine said the wall was both solid rock and empty space at the same time. Elena called her team together around their portable lights. The dig site felt different at night, and the 3 humans were the only living things for miles around. She looked at the data on her tablet and shook her head. According to their tests, this wall was millions of years old. That was impossible because no known species in the galaxy had been building anything that long ago. The next morning brought visitors that Elena had not expected. 3 large ships landed near their camp, and soldiers in strange armor came out. Behind them walked a tall figure in flowing robes. Elena recognized the species from her studies. It was a Vorthan, and from the way the soldiers acted around him, he was someone important. The Vorthan approached their group, and Elena could see fear in his large eyes. When he spoke, his voice shook despite his obvious efforts to stay calm. He told them his name was Ambassador Zethkar and that he needed to see what they had found. Elena led him to the excavation site and watched as his face went pale when he saw the black wall. Zethkar stepped back from the wall as if it might hurt him. He told Elena and her team that they had found something that should have stayed buried. These were the ruins of the Dread Builders. Every species in the galaxy knew the stories about them. They were the ancient ones who had built impossible things and then vanished without a trace. The stories said they would return someday, and when they did, all life in the galaxy would end. Elena tried to explain that these were just old ruins, but Zethkar would not listen. He said his people had been watching for signs of the ancient ones for thousands of years. His government had detectors all across their space looking for the energy signatures that came from ancient ruins. When Elena's team had started digging, the detectors had gone crazy with alerts. Ryan found something that changed everything. Deep in the wall, he discovered a section that looked different from the rest. When Kate scanned it, her machines detected hollow space behind it. Elena made the decision to break through despite Zethkar's protests. What they found inside made everyone stop and stare. The chamber beyond the wall was huge and filled with floating crystals that glowed with soft light. Each crystal was perfectly clear and seemed to contain swirling patterns of energy. When Elena touched one of them, the crystal grew brighter, and suddenly the air above it filled with images. She was looking at a map of the galaxy, but it showed stars and planets that were marked with symbols she did not recognize. Zethkar gasped when he saw the map. He pointed to different areas and named them. Those symbols marked the locations of ancient sites that his people had found over the centuries. There were sites on worlds that belonged to dozens of different species. Some were considered holy. Places in others were avoided completely because strange things happened near them. Elena realized they had found something much bigger than just old ruins. This was a network of sites that covered the entire galaxy. Someone or something had built structures on hundreds of worlds millions of years ago. The crystals seemed to be some kind of database that showed where all the sites were located. Kate managed to copy the data from several crystals before Zethkar insisted they stop. He said his government needed to know about this discovery immediately. More ships were already on their way, and Elena's team would need to cooperate with the investigation. Elena agreed, but she made sure to hide some of the smaller crystals in her personal equipment. As Zethkar's ships prepared to leave, he gave Elena a warning. He told her that news of this discovery would spread quickly through the galaxy. Many species would be afraid, and some might try to destroy the site rather than risk the return of the ancient ones. Elena and her team needed to be very careful about who they trusted with information about what they had found. Elena watched the ships disappear into the sky and looked back at the black wall. She had spent her career studying the remains of dead civilizations, but this felt different. This felt like they had found something that was still alive and waiting. The crystals still glowed in the chamber behind the wall, and she could feel their energy humming through the ground beneath her feet. She made a decision that would change everything. Elena contacted Earth and requested immediate backup. She told them to send their best people and to bring enough equipment for a major excavation. Whatever the Ancient Ones had built here, it was too important to leave buried and too dangerous to face alone. News of the discovery on Kepler 442b spread through the galaxy faster than Elena had expected. Within days, every major government knew that humans had found an ancient site and activated something inside it. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Species that had been at peace for centuries suddenly started moving their military fleets, and some governments declared states of emergency on the capital world of the Aetherian. Collective Chancellor Vexith called an emergency meeting of their High Council. The Aetherians were known for being calm and logical, but even they seemed scared. Vexith stood before a room full of worried officials and showed them images from their oldest archives. The pictures showed massive structures that looked exactly like what Elena's team had found. Their ancestors had called them the works of the first architects. According to Aetherian records, the first architects had built wonders across the galaxy before the current civilizations had even evolved. Then one day they had simply vanished, leaving behind only their impossible structures. The record said that the architects would return when their works awakened again. When that happened, they would reshape the galaxy according to their will, and all current life would be swept away to make room for their new designs. Captain Alex Turner received his orders while his ship, the Horizon, was docked at a trading station near the edge of human space. The message from Earth Command was marked with the highest priority codes and told him to investigate other sites marked on the ancient star maps. His crew was not happy about the assignment because every alien on the station was talking about the Ancient Ones, and none of the stories were good. Lucy Davis was his best pilot, and she had heard rumors from alien traders that some species were already abandoning entire star systems that contained ancient sites. The Crystalline Hive had evacuated 3 of their colony worlds, and their Queen Mother had ordered all Hive ships to prepare for emergency exodus procedures. Nathan Pierce was the ship's scientist, and he tried to explain to Alex that the alien reaction seemed way too extreme for just finding some old ruins. Alex decided to start with the closest site marked on Elena's maps. It was located on a moon orbiting a gas giant in the Tau Ceti system. The moon was supposed to be uninhabited, but when the Horizon arrived, they found ships from 3 different species already there. The aliens were not trying to land on the moon. Instead, they were keeping their distance and scanning it from far away, as if they were afraid to get too close. When Alex contacted the alien ships to ask what they were doing, the response surprised him. The commander of a Nexari vessel told him that they were maintaining a sacred watch over the sleeping temple of their gods. The Nexari had been taking turns guarding this site for over 2,000 years. They believed that as long as someone kept watch, the temple would stay asleep and their gods would not wake up angry. Alex ignored the alien warnings and took his ship down to the moon's surface. What they found there made him understand why the aliens were so scared. The entire moon was covered in structures that seemed to grow out of the rock itself. They were beautiful and terrible at the same time. The buildings twisted up into impossible shapes that hurt to look at and seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human mind could process. Lucy tried to land near one of the smaller structures, but her instruments started going crazy. The navigation system said they were flying in 3 different directions at once, and the altitude readings kept changing even though they were clearly moving in a straight line. She had to land by sight alone, and even then the ground seemed to shift under the ship's landing gear. Nathan took readings of the structures and found the same energy signatures that Elena had detected on Kepler 442b, but here the energy was much stronger, and it seemed to be getting stronger every hour they stayed on the moon. His equipment detected patterns in the energy that looked almost like communication signals, but they were too complex for his computers to decode. Meanwhile, on Earth, historian Carmen Rodriguez was working day and night in the archives trying to understand what they had found. She had started comparing the images from Elena's discovery with ancient human monuments, and the similarities were impossible to ignore. The mathematical proportions were identical to structures like Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid. Even more strange was that some of the symbols Elena had found matched carvings that had been discovered in caves around the world. Carmen made a breakthrough when she found a connection between the ancient sites and human mythology. Stories about lost civilizations and advanced ancestors existed in every human culture. The Greeks had talked about Atlantis, and the Hindus had legends about flying cities. Aboriginal Australians had dreamtime stories about sky people who built sacred places and then returned to the stars. What if these were not just myths but memories of something real? The alien response to Carmen's research was immediate and hostile. When she published her preliminary findings, several alien governments accused humanity of being connected to the Ancient Ones. The hegemony of Kalar sent a message to Earth, demanding that humans stop activating ancient sites immediately. They claimed that humanity was either working with the Ancient Ones or were the Ancient Ones returning in disguise. Back on Kepler 442b, Elena's team had grown to include dozens of specialists from Earth. They were working around the clock to understand the crystal database they had found. Ryan had made progress translating some of the symbols, and what he found was disturbing. The language seemed to follow patterns that were similar to ancient human languages. Some of the root words were almost identical to Sanskrit and Proto-Indo-European. Jake Harrison arrived on Kepler 442b as the team's new linguistics specialist. He brought with him advanced translation software and a database of every known language in the galaxy. When he ran the ancient symbols through his programs, the results were shocking. The software identified the language as being related to a theoretical human proto-language that linguists had been trying to reconstruct for centuries. The implications were staggering. If the Ancient Ones had used a language related to human speech, then either humans were descended from them, or they were descended from humans. Given that the ancient sites were millions of years old and humans had only been in space for a few hundred years, the first option seemed impossible. But the second option was even more unbelievable. Elena stood in the crystal chamber and watched as her team worked to unlock more of the database. Each new discovery made the mystery deeper and more frightening. The aliens were right to be scared, but not for the reasons they thought. The Ancient Ones were not coming back to destroy the galaxy. They had never left because they were still here. They were human. Elena's team had been working for weeks to understand the patterns in the crystal database when Ryan made a discovery that changed everything. He had been comparing the ancient language with human linguistic databases when he found something that made his hands shake. The grammar structure was not just similar to human languages. It was identical to the theoretical mother language that all human speech had evolved from millions of years ago. Jake Harrison confirmed Ryan's findings using different analysis methods. The ancient language used the same word order patterns and grammatical rules that human babies naturally expected when they first learned to speak. It was as if the ancient language was hardwired into human DNA, but that was impossible unless humans and the Ancient Ones were connected in ways that no one had imagined. Captain Alex Turner had visited 12 ancient sites marked on Elena's star maps, and the pattern was the same at every location. The alien species that lived near these sites treated them as either holy places or cursed ground. But human minds seemed to understand the structures in ways that alien minds could not. Lucy Davis could navigate between the twisted buildings without getting lost while alien pilots crashed their ships trying to follow the same paths. Nathan Pierce made detailed studies of the energy fields around each ancient structure. The readings were complex beyond anything he had seen before, but they followed mathematical principles that human scientists had discovered centuries ago. The energy patterns used equations that human physicists considered fundamental laws of the universe. Alien scientists had been studying the same phenomena for thousands of years, but had never been able to understand the underlying mathematics on the ice world of Sigma Draconis 7. Lisa Chang made a discovery that shocked everyone on her research team. She was a marine biologist who had volunteered to study the ancient ruins because they were located near what looked like frozen oceans. Deep in the lower levels of the structure, she found chambers that had been sealed for millions of years. When she opened them, the preservation was perfect. Inside the sealed chambers, Lisa found organic samples that had been stored in some kind of stasis field. When she analyzed the genetic material, her equipment identified cellular structures that were identical to Earth life forms. The DNA used the same coding system and even contained genes that matched species that still existed on Earth today. It was as if someone had taken samples of Earth life and stored them in a cosmic refrigerator millions of years ago. The news of Lisa's discovery caused panic among several alien governments. The Zephyrian Confederacy began moving their war fleets toward human space while demanding an explanation for how human genetic material had ended up in ancient ruins. They accused humanity of lying about their origins and claimed that humans were actually ancient ones who had been hiding among the younger species for thousands of years. Elena received reports from ancient sites across the galaxy that all told the same story. Human research teams were making breakthrough after breakthrough while alien scientists remained baffled. The structures seemed designed to be understood by human minds. The mathematics made sense to human mathematicians. The language could be decoded by human linguists. Even the artwork and architectural styles felt familiar to human eyes. Carmen Rodriguez published a research paper that connected ancient sites to locations mentioned in human mythology and religious texts. She had found over 200 references to flying cities and star people in human cultures from around the world. The descriptions matched the ancient structures so closely that it could not be coincidence. Human ancestors had definitely encountered the Ancient Ones, and the memories had been passed down as myths and legends. The response from alien religious leaders was immediate and hostile. The high priest of the Nexari accused humans of blasphemy for claiming connection to their sacred gods. The Corthan synthesis calculated that if humans were related to the Ancient Ones, then their probability models for galactic survival dropped to less than 3%. Even the normally peaceful Valdorians began questioning whether humans should be allowed to continue their research. Back on Kepler 442b, Elena's expanded team finally cracked the central database that had been hidden deep in the crystal chamber. What they found was not prophecies of return or warnings of destruction. Instead, they discovered something that was both mundane and extraordinary. The database contained construction logs and supply manifests and personnel records. The Ancient Ones had not been gods or cosmic forces. They had been people who worked and built and lived. Just like any other species, the personnel records were written in the same language that Ryan and Jake had been translating, but the names were different from anything they had seen before. However, when Jake ran the names through linguistic analysis software, he found patterns that were startling. The names followed construction rules that were identical to how human names had evolved over time. They even contained root sounds that still existed in modern human languages. Elena stood in the crystal chamber, reading translated construction logs that talked about everyday problems like supply shortages and equipment failures. The Ancient Ones had complained about the weather and worried about meeting deadlines just like any construction crew. They had families and friends and personal relationships. They had been people, not gods, and that made their achievements even more impressive. The most shocking discovery came when Jake found personnel records that included genetic information for the ancient workers. The genetic codes used the same system as human DNA, but they were different enough to suggest evolution over millions of years. It was as if the Ancient Ones were what humans might become if they had millions of years to develop and spread across the galaxy. Lisa Chang arrived on Kepler 442b with samples from 16 different ancient sites. When she compared the genetic material she had found, the results were undeniable. Every ancient site contained preserved samples of life from Earth, not just simple organisms, but complex plants and animals that had existed on Earth millions of years ago. Someone had been collecting and preserving Earth life for a very long time. Elena made the decision to contact Earth with their findings. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The ancient ones were human, or at least they were what humans had once been millions of years ago. Humanity had achieved galactic civilization before and had built wonders that still amazed the galaxy. Today, then, for reasons that were not yet clear, they had left behind their achievements and started over somewhere else. The implications were staggering for both humans and aliens. If the ancient ones had been human, then every alien civilization in the galaxy owed its existence to human intervention. The sites were not random. They had been placed near worlds where life was developing to guide and protect emerging civilizations. Humans had not just built monuments. They had been gardeners cultivating life across the entire galaxy. Elena looked at the data streaming from the crystals and realized that everything was about to change. The galaxy had spent millions of years fearing the return of the ancient ones. Now they would learn that the ancient ones had never left. They had simply forgotten who they were and were only now beginning to remember. The breakthrough came when Jake Harrison finally decoded the central archive that had been locked deep in the crystal database. Elena stood beside him as the translation software processed millions of symbols and converted them into readable text. What appeared on their screens was not mythology or religious text, but something far more mundane and yet infinitely more profound. They were reading the personal journal of someone named Marcus Chun, who had lived over 3 million years ago. Marcus Chun had been an engineer working on what he called the Great Survey Project. His journal entries described a massive undertaking to map and catalog every world in the galaxy that showed signs of developing life. He wrote about visiting thousands of planets and building monitoring stations that could watch over emerging civilizations for millions of years. His team had been just one of hundreds working on the same project across different sectors of the galaxy. Elena read the entries with growing amazement. Marcus complained about bureaucratic delays in getting supplies shipped from Earth. He worried about his daughter, who was studying to become a terraforming specialist. He mentioned video calls with his wife, who was working on a similar project in a different spiral arm of the galaxy. These were not the writings of a god or cosmic force, but of a person living a life that was remarkably similar to what humans still experience today. Carmen Rodriguez arrived on Kepler 442b with data that confirmed what Jake's translation had revealed. Her research on Earth had uncovered evidence that human civilization had indeed risen and fallen multiple times throughout history. The megalithic monuments that archaeologists had studied for centuries were not humanity's first attempts at construction. They were rebuilt memories of far grander achievements that had been lost when previous human civilizations had collapsed or moved on, the journal entries described. Something called the Great Journey, which had been humanity's first expansion across the stars. According to Marcus Chun's records, humans had developed faster than light travel over 4 million years ago, and had spent the next million years spreading across the galaxy. They had built cities on thousands of worlds and had created a galactic civilization that dwarfed anything that existed today. General Patricia Wells coordinated the military response as reports came in from ancient sites across the galaxy. Human teams were making discoveries that changed everything they thought they knew about history. On a dead world near the galactic core, they had found a massive orbital station that still contained functional technology. The station's computers had recognized human genetic markers and had begun powering up systems that had been dormant for millions of years. Captain Alex Turner led the expedition to investigate the orbital station around the dead star, Vega Prime. The structure was enormous even by ancient standards and appeared to be some kind of central hub or headquarters. When his ship approached the station, docking bays opened automatically and guidance systems came online to direct them to a landing platform. It was as if the station had been waiting for humans to return. Inside the station, Alex's team found corridors and rooms that were clearly designed for human use. The gravity was set to Earth normal and the atmosphere was perfectly breathable. Emergency lighting came on as they explored, and environmental systems began adjusting temperature and humidity to human comfort levels. The station's AI systems had been monitoring the galaxy for millions of years, waiting for the return of their creators. Sam Foster was a programmer who had specialized in ancient computer systems. When he interfaced with the station's central computer, the amount of data available was overwhelming. The archives contained detailed records of human civilization spanning over 3 million years. There were technical manuals for technologies that modern humans could barely understand, and historical records that described the rise and fall of multiple human galactic empires. The records told a story that was both inspiring and sobering. Humans had achieved incredible things during their first expansion across the galaxy. They had terraformed dead worlds into gardens and had guided the evolution of dozens of species toward intelligence and civilization. But they had also made mistakes that had nearly destroyed the galaxy, and had learned that with great power came even greater responsibility. Elena read translated sections of the archives that described something called the Great Departure. According to the records, the first human galactic civilization had eventually decided to leave the galaxy and move on to new challenges among distant star clusters. They had spent thousands of years preparing their departure and had built monitoring stations to watch over the civilizations they had helped create. They had not abandoned the galaxy, but had left it in the care of its new inhabitants. The archives explained why the current alien civilizations feared the ancient ones. The departure had not been complete, and some humans had chosen to stay behind. These remaining humans had eventually caused problems by trying to rule over the species they had helped create. The ancient alien records that described the Ancient Ones as terrible oppressors were actually describing these last humans who had refused to leave with the rest of their species. Lisa Shang made another discovery that filled in more pieces of the puzzle. The genetic samples she had found at ancient sites were not just random collections of Earth life. They were carefully chosen seed banks that contained the genetic templates for terraforming new worlds. The ancient humans had been carrying Earth life with them as they spread across the galaxy and had been using it to transform barren planets into worlds suitable for the civilizations they were helping to develop. Nathan Pierce analyzed the technical specifications contained in the orbital station's database and found blueprints for technologies that were far beyond current human capabilities. The ancient humans had developed methods for controlling gravity and manipulating matter at the molecular level. They had built machines that could reshape planets and create artificial stars. Most importantly, they had developed ways to guide evolution and help species develop intelligence and civilization. The revelation that the ancient ones had been human created different reactions among the various alien species. Some, like the scholarly Valdorians, were excited to learn more about their true origins and wanted to work with humans to understand the ancient records. Others, like the proud hegemony of Kalar, were outraged to discover that their entire civilization existed only because of human intervention millions of years ago. Elena stood in the central chamber of the orbital station and looked at displays showing the current state of the galaxy. The monitoring systems had been watching and recording everything for millions of years. The ancient humans had seen every war and every peace treaty. They had watched civilizations rise and fall and had occasionally intervened to prevent total disasters. The galaxy that everyone thought was natural had actually been carefully maintained by automated systems left behind by humanity's ancestors. Sam Foster discovered that the station's computers had been sending signals toward distant galaxies for millions of years. The messages were simple updates about the state of the galaxy and requests for instructions or assistance. According to the records, the original human Exodus fleet had promised to return if they were ever needed again. The signals were still being sent, which meant that somewhere among the distant stars, the descendants of the first human galactic civilization might still exist. Elena realized that everything was about to change again. Humanity had not just returned to the galaxy as a young species exploring the stars. They had returned as the inheritors of a legacy that spanned millions of years and encompassed the guidance and protection of every intelligent species in the galaxy. The ancient ones had not been feared gods or cosmic forces. They had been gardeners. And now their descendants had been given the tools to continue their work. The full scope of ancient humanity's influence became clear as Sam Foster unlocked more sections of the orbital station's vast archives. Elena watched in amazement as the displays showed a galaxy that was nothing like what anyone had believed. What appeared to be natural phenomena were actually massive engineering projects that had been running automatically for millions of years. Asteroid belts that protected developing worlds from cosmic impacts had been artificially created and positioned. Gravitational anomalies that enabled faster-than-light travel had been carefully designed and maintained by hidden machinery. Cole Mitchell was an engineer who had been brought to the station specifically to work with the ancient technology. As he interfaced with the automated systems, he discovered terraforming networks that spanned entire star systems. Machines the size of moons had been working for millions of years to maintain perfect conditions on worlds where alien civilizations were developing. Weather patterns that alien scientists had studied as natural phenomena were actually the result of atmospheric processors that had been hidden in planetary cores. The revelation that their entire environment had been artificially maintained for millions of years created chaos among alien civilizations. The crystalline hive discovered that their homeworld's unique crystal formations had been grown by ancient machines that were still operating deep underground. The Nexari learned that the energy fields they worshipped as divine power were actually the output of fusion reactors that had been built by their human predecessors. Every species found evidence that their development had been guided and protected by technology they had never known existed. Nathan Pierce made a discovery that explained why some alien species had developed faster than others. The ancient archives contained detailed files on every intelligent species in the galaxy, including development timelines and intervention protocols. Species that had faced extinction events or cosmic disasters had received more direct assistance, while others had been left to develop more naturally. The humans had not been playing favorites but had been responding to actual needs and threats. The archives revealed that ancient humanity had not just built monitoring stations and terraforming equipment. They had also influenced the genetic development of species across the galaxy. Lisa Chang found records of careful genetic modifications that had been made to help species adapt to their environments and develop intelligence faster. The diversity of alien life in the galaxy was not the result of random evolution, but of careful biological engineering spanning millions of years. Captain Amy Stone led a diplomatic mission to the Galactic Council with evidence that would change how every species viewed their place in the universe. Ben Clark accompanied her as a xenopsychologist who specialized in understanding how different species processed traumatic revelations. The evidence they carried showed that ancient humans had not been conquerors or oppressors, but gardeners, who had dedicated their civilization to nurturing life and intelligence throughout the galaxy. The response from different alien governments varied dramatically. Archivist Prime Jethner of the Valdorians immediately began organizing joint research projects to study the ancient records and learn more about their species' true origins. He understood that this knowledge could help them develop technologies and solutions that their ancestors had intended them to discover. The Valdorians had always been scholars, and the idea that they had been created by an advanced teaching species excited rather than disturbed them. The hegemony of Kalar had a very different reaction. Their entire culture was built around the idea that they had earned their place in the galaxy through strength and conquest. Learning that they owed their existence to human intervention challenged everything they believed about themselves. Some Kalar leaders called for war against humanity, while others demanded proof that the ancient records were genuine. Their pride could not accept that they were the products of someone else's careful planning. Elena established a joint research facility on Kepler 442b, where human and alien scientists could work together to understand the full extent of ancient humanity's legacy. The facility became a meeting point for species that had never cooperated before. Zethka returned as an official representative of the Vorthan Empire and worked alongside human researchers to translate more of the ancient archives. His fear had been replaced by fascination as he learned about the careful planning that had guided his species' development. The ancient records contained something that surprised everyone. The original humans had predicted that they would eventually return to the galaxy, but not as the same species that had left. They had known that millions of years of separation would cause humanity to evolve and change. The monitoring systems had been programmed to recognize genetic markers that would identify human descendants even after millions of years of evolution and development. Sam Foster discovered that the orbital station contained more than just archives and monitoring equipment. Hidden in the deepest levels were manufacturing facilities that could produce technologies beyond anything current civilizations could build. The ancient humans had left behind the tools their descendants would need to continue their work. Gravity manipulation devices and matter converters and even machines that could guide stellar evolution were waiting to be activated by human genetic authorization codes. Cole Mitchell began the careful process of reactivating some of the ancient manufacturing systems. The first devices he brought online were terraforming seeds that could transform barren worlds into garden planets in just a few hundred years. The technology was so advanced that it seemed like magic, but the operating manual showed that it was based on scientific principles that humans could learn and understand. The ancient humans had intended for their descendants to surpass their achievements. The discovery of functional ancient technology created new tensions among alien species. Some wanted access to the terraforming equipment to expand their civilizations, while others feared that giving humans such powerful tools would upset the balance of power in the galaxy. The Galactic Council spent months debating whether humans should be allowed to activate more of their ancestral legacy, or whether the ancient machines should be shut down permanently. Elena found herself at the center of discussions that would determine the future of the entire galaxy. The ancient humans had left detailed instructions for their descendants, but they had also included warnings about the responsibilities that came with such powerful technology. The archives contained records of previous human civilizations that had destroyed themselves by using their abilities unwisely. Power without wisdom had been the downfall of multiple human galactic empires. Lisa Chang made another breakthrough when she discovered that the genetic samples at ancient sites were not just preserved Earth life but included genetic templates for entirely new forms of life. The ancient humans had been experimenting with guided evolution and had created the blueprints for organisms that could thrive in environments that no natural evolution could produce. They had been preparing to seed life in galaxies that were completely hostile to organic development. The implications were staggering. Ancient humanity had not just been gardening one galaxy, but had been preparing to spread life and intelligence across the entire universe. The current galaxy was just one of many projects they had been working on. The Great Departure had not been an ending, but the beginning of an even more ambitious plan to bring life and consciousness to every corner of existence. Elena stood on the observation deck of the orbital station and watched as human and alien crews worked together to understand technologies that could reshape reality itself. The ancient humans had left behind more than just tools and knowledge. They had left behind a responsibility that their descendants were only beginning to understand. The galaxy was not a collection of separate species competing for resources, but a carefully maintained garden that required constant attention and care. The station's communication systems detected a response to the signals that had been sent toward distant galaxies for millions of years. Somewhere among the stars, the original human Exodus fleet or their descendants were still alive, and were finally ready to make contact again. The return of the Ancient Ones was not a prophecy of destruction, but a reunion of gardeners who had spent millions of years preparing different sections of the universe for the spread of life and consciousness. The Galactic Council chambers had never seen anything like the assembly that gathered to hear the final report on the Ancient Ones. Representatives from every major species sat together in an atmosphere that mixed wonder with uncertainty. Elena Martinez stood at the central podium surrounded by displays showing the evidence that had been gathered from dozens of ancient sites across the galaxy. The truth about humanity's ancient legacy was about to become official galactic policy, Chancellor. Vexith of the Aetherian Collective spoke first, and his words carried the weight of careful deliberation. After months of study and verification, the Council officially recognized that the beings their species had called the Ancient Ones had indeed been an earlier human civilization. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The galaxy that everyone had thought was natural was actually a carefully maintained garden that had been tended by human ancestors for millions of years. Elena had been chosen to lead the Institute for Ancient Studies that was being established on Kepler 442b. The facility would serve as a joint research center where human and alien scientists could work together to understand the full scope of ancient humanity's achievements. More importantly, it would serve as a training center where current civilizations could learn to use the technologies that had been left behind for them. The response from different alien species had varied greatly as they struggled to understand their new place in the universe. The Nexari had undergone a complete religious reformation as their priests worked to reconcile their beliefs with the knowledge that their gods had actually been people. Some Nexari embraced the revelation and began studying ancient human philosophy and science. Others retreated into isolation and refused to accept that their entire worldview had been based on misunderstanding. The Vorthan Empire faced a different challenge as they tried to reconcile their warrior culture with the knowledge that they owed their existence to human intervention. Zethkar had become an advocate for cooperation with humanity, but many of his people struggled with the idea that their strength came from gifts rather than their own achievements. Some Vorthan leaders proposed earning their independence by matching or surpassing the ancient human accomplishments. Captain Alex Turner received a promotion to admiral and was given command of the joint exploration fleets that were being organized to locate more ancient sites. The galaxy was much larger than anyone had realized, and the ancient archive suggested that there were thousands of sites still waiting to be discovered. Each new location provided more pieces of the puzzle and helped explain how the ancient humans had managed such a massive undertaking. Carmen Rodriguez published a comprehensive history of humanity's cyclical nature that became required reading at universities across the galaxy. Her research showed that the pattern of rise, expansion, and departure had repeated multiple times throughout cosmic history. Humanity seemed to have an inherent drive to spread life and consciousness throughout the universe and then move on to new challenges when their work was complete. The current human civilization was just the latest chapter in a story that spanned millions of years. The most significant development came when young engineer Mia Torres successfully reactivated one of the massive terraforming arrays that had been hidden in the galactic core. Working alongside alien scientists, she managed to bring online systems that could transform entire solar systems into gardens suitable for life. The first test was conducted on a dead system near the edge of the galaxy, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Elena stood in the restored central chamber of the original ruins and watched holographic displays that showed green worlds being born across the galaxy. The terraforming arrays were working exactly as their creators had intended. Barren planets were developing atmospheres and oceans, while automated systems began seeding them with life forms that had been preserved for millions of years. The galaxy was becoming more alive and vibrant than it had been since the ancient humans had departed. Sam Foster made a breakthrough that changed everything when he managed to establish two-way communication with the signals that had been detected from distant galaxies. The responses were faint and took years to travel between galaxies, but they were definitely coming from human sources. The original Exodus fleet or their descendants were still alive somewhere among the distant star clusters, and they were excited to learn that their home galaxy was thriving again. The communication revealed that the ancient humans had not been unique in their mission to spread life across the universe. Similar projects were being conducted in dozens of other galaxies by different branches of the human exodus. Each group had taken responsibility for a different section of the universe, and they had been working independently for millions of years to seed life and consciousness wherever they found suitable conditions. The discovery that humanity was part of a universe-wide effort to promote life and intelligence created a new sense of purpose among current human civilization. The ancient legacy was not just about understanding the past, but about continuing the work that their ancestors had started. Modern humans had been given the tools and knowledge they needed to take up the responsibility of gardening life across the galaxy. Elena received reports from ancient sites across the galaxy that told the same story. The automated systems that had been dormant for millions of years were coming back online and beginning to implement programs that had been waiting for human authorization. Weather control systems were stabilizing climates on worlds where alien civilizations were struggling with environmental problems. Defensive systems were activating to protect developing species from cosmic threats that they did not even know existed. The revelation that the galaxy was still being actively maintained by ancient human technology created new cooperation between species that had been enemies for centuries. The Calor-Hegemony and the Zephyrian Confederacy discovered that their border conflicts had been pointless because the ancient systems had been preventing either side from gaining decisive advantages. The technology that protected all species equally had been keeping the galaxy stable while its inhabitants learned to work together. Mia Torres led the team that successfully activated the communication array hidden in the galactic core. The massive transmitter began broadcasting a message toward the distant galaxies where the original human Exodus fleet had traveled. The message was simple but profound. It announced that the Garden Galaxy was thriving and that its caretakers were ready to take on greater responsibilities. It invited the ancient humans to return home when they were ready and asked for guidance on expanding the project to new galaxies. The response came faster than anyone had expected. The ancient humans had been waiting for this message for millions of years, and they were already beginning the long journey home. The return would take thousands of years, even with their advanced technology, but they were excited to see what their descendants had accomplished. More importantly, they were bringing with them knowledge and resources from dozens of other galaxies where similar projects had been successful. Elena stood on the observation deck of the orbital station and looked out at a galaxy that was more alive and vibrant than it had been for millions of years. New worlds were being born while existing civilizations learned to use technologies that could solve problems they had struggled with for centuries. The feared Ancient Ones had not returned as conquerors or destroyers, but as teachers and guides, who had always been watching over their cosmic garden. The final message from the distant galaxies contained coordinates for other universe-spanning projects that needed assistance. The galaxy that had spent millions of years fearing the return of the Ancient Ones was now being invited to join an effort that encompassed the entire universe. Humanity had not just discovered their past, but had found their future as gardeners of life and consciousness across all of existence. In the years that followed, the galaxy became a center of learning and cooperation as species that had been enemies learned to work together toward common goals. The ancient human legacy had not just revealed the truth about the past, but had provided a path toward a future where life and intelligence could flourish throughout the universe. The Ancient Ones had never been gods or monsters, but people who had dedicated their civilization to the most important work imaginable. Now, their descendants could continue that work with the knowledge that they were part of something much larger than themselves.